I'm Noah, and I love the Marx Brothers. I love the Marx Brothers with an intensity that makes me wonder where this kind of love comes from. You know, one of the great paradoxes of the Marx Brothers is that they were the most unsentimental artists. And in their great works, you never catch them asking for your sympathy. And yet, we who love the Marx Brothers, and I know there's a lot of us here tonight, fellow citizens of Fredonia, graduates of Huxley College, patients of Standish Sanitarium, welcome. We love the Marx Brothers sentimentally and passionately and with all our hearts. They have touched our lives and moved us with an artistry that's like that of Picasso or Stravinsky, to whom Woody Allen memorably compared them. I have loved the Marx Brothers this way since before I ever saw a single frame of a Marx Brothers movie. When I was a very small child, I loved books. And my favorite thing to do was leave behind my picture books and nursery rhymes and go downstairs to where my parents' bookshelves lined the walls. And for some reason, of all the mysterious and important grown-up books that they had, I was particularly drawn to a sort of biblical-looking tome bound in black with a perplexing title, Groucho, Harpo, Chico, and sometimes Zeppo, A History of the Marx Brothers and a Satire of the Rest of the World. It's a classic work by Joe Adamson. And I was too young to grapple with the language in this book, but I was transfixed by the photographs. They're unforgettable faces. And I was particularly intrigued and a little bit frightened of that one particular face with the rectangular mustache inexplicably smeared across it. The brothers in this book were unusual, but they were also strangely familiar and felt kind of continuous with the popular culture that I knew at the time, which would have been the Muppets and Maurice Sendak, Dr. Seuss and Lewis Carroll, and the great absurdists of children's literature. And as I got a little older, I started to realize that these brothers often appeared in the world outside my house. My father bought me my first issue of Mad Magazine, the foundational text of American pre-adolescence. And the Marx Brothers popped up in Mad a lot, especially in Dave Berg's comics, The Lighter Side of ... I noticed that Mr. Kaputnik's doctor had a mustache and a cigar, and I knew that was supposed to be Groucho. And later I noticed that when Les Ly played a doctor on You Can't Do That on Television, he had that look too, and a kind of velvety back-of-the-throat diction that I understood to be a Groucho Marx impression, even though at that time I still had not heard the actual voice of the actual Groucho Marx. You know, I'm just old enough to have had a childhood wherein it was not so easy to find old movies. And we used to look forward to seeing The Wizard of Oz once a year on television, every Thanksgiving, on a 13-inch screen with round corners, and very exciting. And it was around 1989 by the time the home video revolution got as far as our household. And when it did, an immediate priority was get to know the Marx Brothers. Every movie, hunt them down, memorize them, live with them. And every episode of You Bet Your Life I could get my hands on. Every book, every article, every audio recording, whatever I could do to know everything there was to know about these guys. After closing time at the public library, confused librarians working late because this 13-year-old kid couldn't tear himself away from a microfilm machine with 100-year-old copies of Variety. I was a cool kid. And I identified strongly with and as Groucho. I used to steal my mother's eyebrow pencil and lock myself in the bathroom and give myself a mustache and rehearse, you know. And when I was 14, a community theater allowed me to produce my own sort of bootleg production of Animal Crackers. And I performed as Groucho at every opportunity. Forced my brother and sister to perform as Harpo and Chico, whether they liked it or not, but they liked it. And continued, perhaps ill-advisedly, to more or less impersonate Groucho all the time in real life too, which did not serve me that well when I became interested in girls. I vividly and sadly remember sitting on a bus, on a bench waiting for a school bus with some poor girl I couldn't live without in the 7th grade. And I actually told her that her eyes shined like the pants of a blue serge suit. And this poor girl, I mean, she didn't know what a blue serge suit was, and neither did I. And that was just the beginning of our problems. But I was in love with the Marx Brothers and with the theater, obsessed with writing and performing in musicals. And I think the fact that I was a theater kid and am a theater kid is the reason why it was the Marx Brothers' stage career that I always found most interesting, particularly the golden period in the 1920s, when the Marx Brothers were the toast of Broadway. These were the Marx Brothers I loved the most because they were just tantalizingly out of reach. They weren't available like the movie Marx Brothers. And my favorite movies of theirs to watch were Coconuts and Animal Crackers, because those are the links to the Broadway years. But to me, even more intriguing than Coconuts and Animal Crackers was their 1924 Broadway debut. I'll Say She Is, the Lost Marx Brothers Musical. The one that got away, the one that they never made into a film and was never revived on stage. I'll Say She Is had a book and lyrics by Will B. Johnstone. Whatever will be, will be. And, you know, Johnstone was a brilliant protean creative guy who in his time was best known as a political cartoonist. In fact, he created one of the really iconic images of the 20th century, the naked taxpayer wearing a barrel. And today he's best known for co-writing with S.J. Perlman the screenplays of Monkey Business and Horse Feathers. Johnstone's story for I'll Say She Is was about a bored heiress looking for thrills. And every scene in the review is an attempt to give her a thrill. And it's a bit of a spoiler alert here, but in the end she learns that love is the greatest thrill of all. So it's pro-love. And into this scenario, they interpolated some of the Marx Brothers' most successful early vaudeville material, including that hilarious sketch that they filmed at Paramount in 1931, which you may know. My name is Sammy Brown, and I just came into town. Saw your ad, you're Mr. Lisa, you could make a minimum. And some new material, including a masterpiece of sketch comedy known as the Napoleon Scene, starring Groucho as Napoleon, the ingenue Lotta Miles as Josephine, and the other Marx Brothers as Josephine's various lovers. The Napoleon Scene is the keystone of the Marx Brothers' early canon, and really the springboard to everything they did on stage and filmed thereafter. The show also had delightful music by Will's brother, Tom Johnstone, who was a member of the Lambs. And it was the most successful thing the Marx Brothers ever did on stage. And it remained, until the end of their career, the most successful thing they ever did on stage. And Joe Adamson, in that book that I fell in love with before I could read, referred to it as the beginning of the Marx Brothers proper. One of the things that I'm most proud of is that, in addition to its ancient history, I'll Say She Is now has a recent history. But before we go forward, I'd like to introduce you to someone who will take us back to the night of May 19th, 1924, when I'll Say She Is opened on Broadway. He is an accomplished actor and musician. He is an indie theater person of the year. And he is, let's face it, who are we kidding, a hell of a guy. He is also the second performer in the history of the world to play the Harpo Marx role in I'll Say She Is. And his devotion to this role is so complete that he even does an impression of Harpo in real life, speaking. And so now, to read Harpo's account of the original Broadway opening of I'll Say She Is, as set down in his immortal memoir, Harpo Speaks, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Seth Shelden.
Normally, they don't make me speak. But when I do, they say I don't shut up. The story of the Marx Brothers' Broadway debut on the night of May 19th, 1924, has been told many times. It has been rehashed in columns, articles, and books, and on the radio. How Minnie fell off a chair while being fitted for her opening night gown and broke her leg and had to be carried into her box at the casino. How one famous critic was furious at his paper for making him cover some damn acrobats. How the Marx Brothers stood the audience on its ear. How that disgruntled critic laughed so hard he cried. There's very little that I can add to that story, I'm sorry to say. All I can remember, in all honesty, is doing the show, getting some good laughs, taking a few bows, then going home alone to Long Island and straight to bed. Minnie, because of her busted leg, decided to spend the night at the hotel. At 8 o'clock in the morning, the phone rang. It was Groucho. He was excited. "Hey, Hop, wake up," he said. "Have you read the reviews?" "What reviews?" I said. "Variety doesn't come out until tomorrow." "No, the newspaper critics," said Groucho. "The Sun, the Times, the Trib, the World, all the big critics." "Yeah, they liked us?" "They loved us. We're ahead, listen." I interrupted Groucho to say, I'd rather go back to bed than listen to any reviews. I didn't know anything about Broadway critics, only the mugs who wrote for Variety. All I ever really read in the papers were the sports pages and once in a while a column like J.S. Kaufman's or FPA's Conning Tower. If the big critics liked our show, that was nice, but it was nothing to wake up a guy at 8 in the morning. Groucho wouldn't get off the phone. Let me read you how it starts out in the Sun," he said. "This you gotta hear." All right, I said. "Go ahead, it's your nickel." Groucho then read, to my growing embarrassment. Harpo Marx and some brothers, hilarious antics spread good cheer at the casino, by Alexander Wolcott. As one of the many who laughed immoderately throughout a greater portion of the first New York performance given by a new musical show entitled, if memory serves, I'll Say She Is, it behooves your correspondent to report at once that Harlequinade has some of the most comical moments vouchsafed to the first nighters in a month of Mondays. It is a bright-colored and vehement setting for the goings-on of those talented cut-ups, the four Marx Brothers. In particular, it is a splendacious and reasonably tuneful exercise for going to see that silent brother, that sly, unexpected, magnificent comic among the Marxes, who is recorded somewhere on a birth certificate as Adolf, but who is known to the adoring two-a-day as Harpo Marx. Surely there should be dancing in the streets when a great clown comes to town, and this man is a great clown. Harpo, so styled oddly enough because he plays the harp, says never a word from first to last, but when by merely leaning against one's brother one can seem richly and irresistibly amusing, why should one speak? Groucho paused. "Is that all?" I said. "Didn't the son of a bitch say anything about you or Chico or Zeppo?" "What did he think? I was doing a single? Is he blind or something?" "Oh, there was more," Groucho said, "plenty about all the rest of them. He just thought I'd like to hear the part about me." "Like me to read it again, old clown?" he said. I hung up on him and went back to sleep. At 10 o'clock, the phone rang again. A voice I had never heard before said, "Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Harpo Marx?" From the way he spoke, I couldn't tell if he was a con artist or some ham actor Groucho had hired to pull a gag on me. I was very suspicious. "I'm Harpo Marx," I said. "Who's this?" "The name is Wolcott," he said. "Alexander Wolcott." The name didn't ring any bells. I didn't connect it with what Groucho had read over the phone. I'd been too sleepy at the time. "Sorry," I said, "don't think I know you." I was still suspicious. "I do a little chore now and then for the New York Sun," the guy said. "I did a little chore last night, as a matter of fact. I reviewed your new show. And now I would like very much to meet you." I didn't know what to say. Wolcott went on. "Forgive me for being so presumptuous and calling you out of the blue," he said. "I got your number from Charlie MacArthur, who seemed to think you wouldn't mind." "Oh, well, so he was a friend of Ben Hecht's friend Charlie. Yeah, he was all right then." I told him so, and he laughed and said, "Now that we've exchanged references, can we meet? Will you receive me if I barge into your dressing room before the show tonight?" "Sure, why not?" I said, and he seemed very pleased. Before he hung up, he said, By the by, Mr. Marx, how did you like my little piece in this morning's Sun? I said, I thought it was the lousiest review I had ever read. And he laughed so hard I had to hold the receiver a foot away. When he hung up, I reflected that a guy who laughed like that couldn't be all bad. I'd give him a little time after the show. It wouldn't hurt. Then I'd go over to Lindy's and relax, where nobody ever uses words like behooves and splendatious and presumptuous.
I'm going to make a note to the staff to count the silverware before we get out of here. I'll Say She Is has always felt like it was moved by fate. When it came along, the Marx Brothers had really reached an impasse and weren't sure if they could continue in show business. You know, they'd really gone as far as they could in vaudeville. They'd been on the road since they were children and were tired of it, and they wanted a legitimate hit that would let them stay in New York. And the Johnstone brothers had also reached an impasse. They had written a number of musicals for the stage and had some moderate successes, but were still waiting for a big hit. Well, in 2009, I had reached a sort of impasse of my own. I had spent the last several years with my partner Amanda Sisk, creating and producing the Nero Fiddled musicals. This was a series of downtown political satires, and we loved those shows and put everything we had into them, but felt we just couldn't go any further with them, largely because musical theater is an awkward medium for topical satire. You know, this stuff was all ripped from the headlines, but a musical requires a long developmental process. And it got frustrating, and it was probably inevitable that in the search for something timeless to work on, I would come home to the Marx Brothers. Without knowing exactly why, I began a long period of deep and arduous research into I'll Say She Is, taking advantage of a lot of the digital resources that were now available. I spent weeks and months and eventually years digging as deep as I could into newspaper and magazine archives and museum and university and library collections. Wherever I could find them, the recorded recollections of people associated with the original production. And as I continued this and dug deeper and deeper, I became aware that the show was revealing itself to me in fragments. I was also extremely lucky at this point to meet the remarkable Ms. Meg Farrell, who is a musicologist and musical theater historian, and also happens to be the great-granddaughter of Will B. Johnstone, who has a deep understanding of his work and is also the custodian of his diaries. Johnstone was a diligent diarist all through the 20s, and so through Meg I was able to learn a lot about the original production that has not been available to other researchers. I had Johnstone's 1923 rehearsal typescript from the Library of Congress. This is about a 30-page document, sort of an outline with dialogue, but it had the scheme of the show and a lot of the original material, and it gave me a clothesline to start filling in the blanks. So I filled in the blanks with material quoted in reviews and Groucho ad-libs, which were recorded by Broadway columnists, and material from Will B. Johnstone's newspaper prose and from earlier surviving fragments of the Marx Brothers vaudeville act, and from previous shows written by the Johnstones. You know, these guys wrote 6 or 7 of these reviews, and 3 or 4 of them were about bored heiresses looking for thrills. So there was a lot of material to work with. And I also occasionally had the pleasure of filling in the blanks with my own Marxist intuition and fulfilling an unlikely dream of sort of writing for the Marx Brothers. It also became, unexpectedly, just the most delightful songwriting challenge, because I was able to locate about half of the original score, but for the other songs I interpolated music from other Johnstone shows with new lyrics that were designed to fit the occasion of I'll Say She Is. And I will admit to you that I did indulge a few concessions to expectations and took some liberties. You know, in the original I'll Say She Is, for example, there was no signature Groucho musical number. But of course I couldn't resist taking a bouncy Tom Johnstone show tune and turning it into a sort of Captain Spaulding pastiche to use in the Napoleon scene. So after working on this hard for about 5 years, and reworking it, I finally had in my hands a cohesive script for I'll Say She Is. I think the first time the show has ever had a cohesive script. And I was proud enough of that achievement, but it seemed like getting the thing back on stage was impossibly daunting. Amanda and I had produced all our own shows, but they were willfully small-scale downtown entertainments, you know, where 5 actors used 20 wigs and 10 hats to play 100 characters. And I'll Say She Is was the opposite. It was a scruffy but lavish 1920s review on a fairly large scale. And I knocked on every door I could think of and tried to get the thing moving forward. But every lead evaporated. And in early 2014, with the 90th anniversary of the original show approaching, I was really in despair over the project. You can picture the scene: a gentle violin is playing. I'm lying in the gutter, clutching a bottle of Gallagher and Sheen ginger ale. And there I was found by a hero and a friend, the playwright, author, performer, neo-vaudevillian impresario, and I'll Say She Is producer, Mr. Trav S.D., who was going to be here tonight and appear on this bill. Trav isn't feeling well tonight, but sends his best, and is really one of the guiding lights of this project. And I, wept on his shoulder, and I said, Trav, I have this work. I've been working on it for 5 years. I think it's of some historic importance, and I also think it might be like the most entertaining thing you could possibly see on stage. But I can't get it on. And Trav said, yes, you can, and I will help you. And among many other things, Trav brought on board the great songwriter and musical stylist Sabrina Chapp as musical director and arranger, which was and continues to be a dream come true, someone to take care of the music with the same love and attention that I was lavishing on the lyrics. At that point, Trav and I were both on the planning committee for Marx Fest, which, as you know, was not incidentally conceived by our host for the evening, Kevin Fitzpatrick. I'm gesturing into the darkness because I thought Kevin was there. He's somewhere about. You never know where he's going to pop up. But if you have a round of applause you're not using, Mr. Kevin Fitzpatrick. And thanks to Kevin and the rest of our committee, Marx Fest was a dream, and I got to meet some of my Marx Brothers heroes and perform as Groucho all over the city. And I'll Say She Is had a careful and loving re-premiere as a staged reading. And shortly after that, a larger production in the 2014 New York International Fringe Festival. The response to I'll Say She Is at the Fringe Festival was awesome. And I promise, my dear sir, I would never use that word unless I really meant what it means. It was awesome. The production, every show sold out almost immediately. A 90-year-old musical by artists who haven't walked the earth in 50 years. And although the joke was that this would be the only show in the Fringe Festival where the whole audience had gray hair, we were delighted and astonished at the number of kids and teenagers who were there and were enthusiastic. Half the audience had gray hair, the other half had backwards baseball caps. And every Marx Brothers entrance got cheers and applause, and the show got the kind of laughs that you dream of. And it was everything we could have hoped for in the reception to the first production of I'll Say She Is since the Marx Brothers hung it up in 1925. So now we're planning a fully realized production and a chance to see this show in all its glory. At the Fringe, we showed that the Marx Brothers comedy material in I'll Say She Is survives. It's really gold, and it's like getting a whole new early Marx Brothers movie that you've never seen. But because of the limitations of the Fringe Festival, we weren't really able to convey the show as a full-scale review of the 1920s. And I also just know that if it is to have a commercial future, which is what we all want for it, it needs this developmental step. The Marx Brothers and the Johnstone Brothers worked on I'll Say She Is in front of hundreds of audiences before they dared to try to bring it to Broadway. And we know that we have to work on it even harder because we're not them. So we've booked the Connelly Theater. It's a beautiful, intimate 19th century proscenium house on East 4th Street for a nonprofit production which runs May 28th through July 2nd of this year. with a dynamite creative team, which is essentially a hybrid of my old crew from the Nero Fiddled musicals and the dazzling group that Trav assembled for the Fringe Festival. It's nonprofit under the sponsorship of Fractured Atlas, which I think is important because it allows this group of artists to concentrate only on making dreams come true for those of us who would give anything to somehow have been at the Casino Theater in 1924 when the wild young Marx Brothers took this city by storm. It is truly a show that has everything, except $50,000. Actually, I'm exaggerating for comic effect. Before this event began, I checked our crowdfunding page, and actually, this is truly a show that has everything, except $48,000. You know, those of you who've been with us from the beginning have often heard me refer to I'll Say She Is as a charmed project. And we have been lucky every step of the way. But we have had some recent setbacks in the fundraising department. For reasons not connected to the show, some expected sources of funding are not going to be available, so we're crowdfunding a larger portion than we expected. In the first phase of our crowdfunding campaign, we successfully raised $10,000 from Marx Brothers fans and friends of the show, and that secured our booking at the Connelly. But we do still have quite a mountain to climb in the next month to make this happen and to establish what we hope will be the template for an eventual commercial revival. On the chance that there's anyone here tonight who might be interested in becoming a supporter or a producer of I'll Say She Is, please talk to us after the show. We would be more than willing. We also, after the performance is over, we have computers open to our crowdfunding page. You can read about our fabulous donor rewards at levels from $25 to wow. And at the higher levels, some really genuinely exciting ways that you can become part of the show. But if this project is your cup of tea and if you'd like to see it happen, just as valuable as financial support is influence. If you know anyone who might be thrilled to know that this is happening, who might be interested in being part of it, helping out at the theater, or supporting it financially, please help us spread the word. And if you would tell our story to your audience of readers, followers, listeners, and other adherents, help us spread the word and make our crowdfunding campaign go viral, and help us perhaps reach some allies in high places who can help put this thing on its feet. You know, this is all happening at a time when I think the Marx Brothers are about to have a moment in the zeitgeist like they haven't had since the 1970s. As you may know, Rob Zombie is about to direct a major motion picture adapted from Raised Eyebrows, Steve Stollier's beautiful memoir of his years working for Groucho. And last year, our friend Robert Bader put out his landmark DVD collection of unreleased Marx Brothers TV appearances. Also this year or next year, I think, Mr. Bader's hotly anticipated chronicle of their early stage career will be published. Matthew Coniam, who wrote last year's immediately indispensable book, The Annotated Marx Brothers, has a new book coming out from McFarland this year about Groucho's solo career, a book to which I contributed my appendix. And also coming soon is a beautiful graphic novel about the Marx Brothers from Mr. Rick Sansone with a little bit of help from me. And I'm very happy to say this April, my own book, Gimme a Thrill, the story of I'll Say She Is, the Lost Marx Brothers Musical, and how it was found, will be coming to you from our friends at Bear Manor Media. So I do think that there is a Marx moment on the horizon.